I'll give you a few quotes directly from Kepler himself. He said, "To God there are in the whole material world, material laws, figures, and special relations of special excellency and of the most appropriate order." Here he's talking about the geometrical construction of the cosmos, but also the mathematical laws that he developed. First, second, and third laws of planetary motion. He goes on to say, those laws are within the grasp of the human mind. God wanted us to recognize them by creating us after his own image, so that we could share in his own thoughts. He goes on to say that geometry provided God with the patterns for the creation of the world and has been transferred to humanity with the image of God. For what is there in the human mind besides figures and magnitudes? Here he's talking about how we work from imagination in our investigation of the world, the imagery in our minds. It is only these which we can apprehend in the right way, and if piety allows us to say so, our understanding is in this respect of the same kind as the divine, at least as far as we are able to grasp something of it in our mortal life. For the divine counsels are impenetrable, but not his material creation. You see here this ancient philosophy of the two books of God's revelation. And as I sat here earlier this morning, I was delighted to see that in the first two stained glass windows, we have the Word and the world. And that's exactly what Kepler was celebrating. He said, as natural philosophers, we're like priests, but we're exegeting the book of nature. He said in his famous work that he considered his magnum opus, the Mysterium Cosmographicum, or the mysteries of the world. God, the creator, had the mathematicals with him as archetypes from eternity in their simplest divine state of abstraction. So if we have any Plato scholars in the room, you know that this is a very Pythagorean Platonic statement to make. I want to situate Kepler's metaphysic about cosmic comprehensibility in a little diagram that I think you might find helpful. At the top, we have the archetype, or the mathematical plan for creation that has existed from eternity in the mind of God. That archetype is made manifest in the material creation as a copy. And then image-bearing creatures, humankind, we can look to the copy, and because of our mathematical aptitudes and our sensory experiences of the world, we can get a little glimpse into the very mind of God by observing all the things that he has made. I hope that reminds you of some key scripture, such as Romans 1:20. All right, there's your little bit of intellectual history culminating with Johannes Kepler. We're going to leap forward again to what we could refer to as the physics revolution of the early 20th century. What I'd like to do is profile several Nobel laureates of 20th century physics, and I do this to demonstrate that this Pythagorean Platonic idea of cosmic comprehensibility and the things that must resonate, mathematics, matter, and mind, this was a huge topic of philosophical discussion, especially around this particular time in the history of modern science. Now, with the possible exception of the first one I'm going to show you, none of these were religious believers. And I don't have time to unpack why I'm sort of excluding the first one, but I just wanted to offer you that bit of information because these aren't Christians we're talking about. The first is Max Planck, and in his scientific autobiography, which was published posthumously, he made this statement that sounds so Keplerian to me. He said, "My original decision to devote myself to science was a direct result of the discovery which has never ceased to fill me with enthusiasm since my early youth, the comprehension of the far from obvious fact that the laws of human reasoning coincide with the laws governing the world about us. His contemporary and colleague Albert Einstein remarked on several occasions in interviews, in letters, in essays, that this comprehensibility is miraculous. He says the fact that it is comprehensible is a miracle. Even if the axioms of a theory, such as this theory of relativity, are proposed by man, the success of such a project presupposes a high degree of ordering of the objective world, and this could not be expected a priori. That is the miracle which is being constantly reinforced as our knowledge expands. Paul Dirac, Nobel Prize 1933. God is a mathematician of a very high order, and he used advanced mathematics in constructing the universe. To be clear, Paul Dirac here is using the word God metaphorically. Wolfgang Pauli, who I'm hoping to do some work on this year, Nobel Prize 1945, he said, "We must postulate a cosmic order of nature beyond our control, to which both the outward material objects and the inward images are subject." We then come to Eugene Wigner, Nobel Prize 1963. Famous essay. You can access this for free online. I highly encourage you to take a look at it. It's only 4 or 5 pages long, entitled "The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences," published in 1960, written in 59, officially published in 1960. And he makes several very important points about this grand cosmic harmony. He says, "The enormous usefulness of mathematics in the natural sciences is something bordering on the mysterious. There's no rational explanation for it. It's not at all natural that the laws of nature exist, much less that man is able to discover them." We'll spring forward again to the contemporary conversation. We've gone from Pythagoras, and now we're landing on Penrose. Roger Penrose, Nobel Prize 2020. He says, "There is an extraordinary concurrence between the workings of the natural world at its most fundamental levels and sophisticated mathematical theory." So in interviews, in several of his books, and several of his peer-reviewed scientific papers, he discusses something called the three worlds, three mysteries problem. If you start at the top of the diagram, you have the Platonic mathematical world. Moving around clockwise, you come to the physical world. What I want you to notice is in between there's this cone shape. And what he means by that is that there's only a very small part of this infinite, abstract mathematical world that we use when we examine the physical world. And then it's only a small part of that physical world that gives rise to the mental world, meaning the human brain. And then with that mental world, with part of it, we're able to discover the mathematical realm, this abstract, eternal realm of truths. And he says that this is just a profound mystery because it's not a question physics can answer. Metaphysical questions demand a metaphysical answer. And so he chalks it up to permanent mystery.